Okay, we are now live.
Great, thank you. This is Nick Hacker. Is Christy on the line?
Hi, Chair Hacker, this is Christy.
Great, wonderful. Wonderful. I show it 1 minute after 3, so we'll kick the meeting off. Welcome to the July 23rd meeting of the State Board of Higher Education via Microsoft Teams. It seems about every 2 meetings we get introduced to new technology, and it's always a pleasure. The Microsoft Teams is a little bit of a safer way for us to meet virtually and to allow for presentations. We do encourage videos. I know that especially with the board members, it's always nice to see more of the human face and interaction as we go through our meetings. So welcome to it's a special board meeting. We don't normally have meetings in the summer, but with the occurrence of the COVID-19 pandemic, we scheduled these, and as anticipated, we do have some business. And I do want to point out that we're continuing along the path of having our retreat in September, and a part of that at this month's meeting and next month's meeting is Jerry Rosted in his new role is going to give us an update on kind of what our current strategic plan is later in the meeting. The purpose for that is to get our minds working and thinking strategically about the NDUS and Board of Higher Ed strategic plan. So we'll do that at the end of today, and that is the intent for us revisiting those goals as a part of the strategic plan so that we are refreshed and ready for developing an updated strategic plan later in the year after our retreat. So with that, we're going to kick the meeting off. Christy, would you call the roll?
Board Chair Hacker.
Here.
Dr. Ryan.
Here.
Ms. Nesset.
Here.
Mr. Wetch.
Here.
Ms. Bai.
Here.
Ms. Solberg.
Here.
Mr. Mahalik. Ms. Louders.
Here.
Ms. Mattern.
Here.
Dr. Legursky.
Here.
Mr. Mahalik. Okay, President Jensen. President Easton.
This is Doug Jensen. I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. President Easton.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Christy. Yep.
President Darling.
Christy, this is Doug Darling. I'm here.
President Van Horn.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
President Shirley.
Hi, Christy. This is Steve.
Dean Migler.
Good afternoon. Jerry Migler here.
President Richmond.
Good afternoon, Christy. This is John.
President Brashani.
Good afternoon, Christy. Dean's here.
President Armacost.
Hi, Christy. I'm here.
President LaFave.
Hi, Christy. Al LaFave is here.
President Miller.
Good afternoon, Christy. I'm here.
Okay, and we also have the Chancellor and the System Office staff on Teams Live with us. Mr. Eric Olson, are you on? Eric Olson. Okay, I will check on Mr. Olson, and thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And first and foremost, I would like to welcome our new member, Member Joe Wetch, originally from Bismarck, now living in Fargo, and as an attorney in Fargo. Joe, if you'd like to do a elevator pitch introduction, we'll let you speak up, and welcome to the Board of Higher Ed.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Hacker. I'm very much looking forward to the challenge of serving the state of North Dakota and its people in the North Dakota University system. In my new position as a board member, I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you as we work collaboratively for the goals of the university system. And so I'm going to be quiet and listen to most everything that's being said here so I can try and get up to speed.
Well, thank you, Joe, and welcome. We're glad to have you. I'd also like to re-welcome in their official capacities as board members now, Dr. Elizabeth Legarski from the University of North Dakota, as well as Erica Solberg, our new student member. Their terms just began at the beginning of July, and so welcome to both of you, and we're glad to have you, and I'm sure we'll hear from you later again today. I believe we introduced Erica already, and she spoke, but Elizabeth, did you have an opportunity at our prior meeting? I don't believe you did. Would you like to give us a brief introduction?
Sure. My name is Liz Legarski, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at UND, where I've been for 10 years now. I'm actually originally from Minnesota, so not too far from home. And I'm a first-generation college graduate, so I have a particular love for higher education because I've seen in my own life its transformational nature and all of the opportunities that it's given me. And I think it also gives me some insight into some of the barriers that a lot of students, non-traditional students, face in going to college and in completing a higher ed degree. So I'm really excited to be here and representing faculty. I think the faculty voice is really important, and I've had a great time getting to know faculty across the NDUS system, and I'm looking forward to doing my best to represent them as I can on the state board. So thank you for having me.
Great, welcome Liz, and welcome Erica. I think Erica made it on too. She was able to introduce herself with us, and we encourage all the board members to reach out. I did have an opportunity to visit with all three of these board members offline, and it's important that in this time of separation and social distancing that we make sure we take that extra step to build relationships, which are vitally important to the board. With that, I'm going to take, before we move on to the business, I do want to speak on behalf of the board and offer our, as well as my condolences to the DiLorenzo family and the entire University of North Dakota community following the tragic death of Tom. During his 7 years of service, he was known for his innovative spirit and willingness to go above and beyond to help the students of UND. Where he was also first hired to be the lead academic administrator on campus. Dr. DiLorenzo's had a wealth of teaching and administrative experience and a distinguished research track record. He was the leader at UND and led the school's new strategic plan process, as well as launch with distinction. He was a crusader for the objectives within the plan because they were designed to create a campus community from which each student could grow to be a leader. He performed his duties with care and compassion for others, and through his service, the campus and system will forever remember and be indebted for the commitment to UND and the entire state. We mourn Dr. DiLorenzo's loss, but also celebrate his memory and the imprint he made on higher education in North Dakota. So our hearts are with you, to the University of North Dakota and to the family of Dr. Tom DiLorenzo. He will be missed. If there are no other feedback or comments in regards to that matter, we'll move on to our first action item, which are the minutes of the May 29th and June 30th meetings. Are there any changes? If not, we'll be looking for a motion.
Chair Hacker, this is Casey. I would move approval of the minutes from May 29th, 2020 and June 30th, 2020.
This is Danita. I second.
Thank you, Casey and Danita. This motion is second. Christy, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Louders,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Ms. Bai,
Yes.
Mr. Mahalik, Ms. Nesset,
Yes.
Ms. Solberg,
Yes.
Mr. Wedge,
Yes.
Board Chair Hacker.
Yes, thank you very much. That'll bring us to item number 2 on our agenda, an update on the NDUS Smart Restart Task Force. And I want to start off with a big debt of gratitude and appreciation for Dr. Nguyen, as well as the many other individuals engaged in different tiers of task forces and many meetings, and lots of time and effort in work that's gone into this. It's put us in a position to be prepared for the next chapter of our reopening. And Josh, do you want to kick it off?
Thank you very much, Chair Hacker. It's nice to be with all of you today. I thought I would summarize the activities of the task force and just bring you up to date and then be prepared to answer any questions. So as you may recall, the chair and the chancellor asked me to head this task force for the entire university system, and we've called it the NDUS Smart Restart Task Force. And we were really charged with helping to do two things. Number one was to facilitate the re-entry, the return of students to campus instruction. It is clear from the feedback from students that while the university system pivoted quite effectively to go to an online format as required in this COVID experience, students really desire a campus experience where they can meet with colleagues, mentors, and so forth. So that was goal one, but that obviously is tempered by goal two, which is to try to ensure that the campuses are as safe as is feasible given the realities of the COVID challenge. So the task force was brought together with the goals of figuring out ways in which we could help facilitate the return of students along with faculty and staff to the campuses, and yet to do so in a way that was as safe as feasible given the realities of the seriousness of the COVID situation. So the structure of the task force is that we're composed of 3 working groups, one representing the larger campuses, a second one, the middle-sized campuses, and then the third working group, the smaller campuses. The 2 of the task force are chaired by college presidents. The large group representing NDSU and UND are actually co-chaired by Mike Bohr from NDSU and Eric Plummer from UND. The task force working groups were then joined by me, Dr. Paul Carson, an infectious disease specialist from NDSU, as well as university system personnel, and we were advised by state board member Dr. Casey Ryan to accomplish really 3 major tasks. The first was to collect and catalog the various policies and procedures that each of the institutions had so that they would be in one location, easily accessible by all. The second function was, especially through the working groups, to engage in conversations regarding common areas of concern, interest, and approach so that similar-sized institutions could profit from the deliberations and activities of the other organizations that had similar type of problems. And then the third challenge for the for the task force was to look at those things where we might be able to do things collectively together, where for instance, something that was promulgated at one institution might become the footprint, the blueprint that other institutions could use, adaptable as might be necessary for their particular needs, but avoiding some of the duplication of effort that might be otherwise required. Another example of this, which I'll touch on in just a second, is the testing that the Department of Health would be doing, where we clearly needed a coordinated approach for the entire university system, even though the specifics of the testing will vary in different localities. So those 3 overarching goals were set for the task force. And I think the feedback that we've gotten so far is that the task force has been effective in achieving or at least addressing those 3 goals. There now is a central repository of policies and procedures. There have been good discussions between similar-sized organizations that have helped refine their own approaches, and we've made substantial progress in looking at certain challenges that are system-wide, such as testing. So let me just jump off and talk a little bit about testing as to where we are. I'm doing this on behalf of a number of institutions that work together to do both testing as well as contact tracing, and that includes the North Dakota Department of Health, local public health units, the various institutions of healthcare that are involved, along with the campuses of the North Dakota University system. I believe that we have online Mr. Vern Dosh, who has helped coordinate these activities, and he will be available should you have specific questions about that when I complete my remarks, Chair Hacker. So the first question is about testing is, why is it important for the university system to do it? And the second question is, okay, so what's the plan? Well, the reason why we feel that widespread testing of especially returning students, but also faculty and staff, is that especially for students, they will be returning to the various campuses from various locales. Now, for some of the smaller institutions, their catchment area is smaller, so many of those students will be coming from their local community, but not all. For the larger institutions, the catchment area is much larger, and the likelihood of a student coming from another location where there's more COVID going on and bringing it onto the campus is substantial. Additionally, many of the students live and work and study together. So they're in congregate living situations. We're bringing together a lot of people onto campus. So even with all the mitigation strategies of keeping physical distancing on campus and so forth, the potential for rapid spread of the virus of especially returning students is substantial. So thanks to the remarkable cooperation of the governor's office, the Department of Health, local public health units, and so forth, the Department of Health has developed a wide-ranging testing plan involving literally dozens of locations to test incoming students. Our goal is to test as many of the students as possible, and the exact details of this plan should be available to all of us by the end of the week, by tomorrow, so that the state board, as well as the presidents of all the institutions, will know all the specific details of this widespread testing program. Our goal is to get as many of the students tested as possible, and then that will enable us to do contact tracing. And the goal is to try to identify students before they get on campus and before there is widespread transmission of the virus on campus and into the community. So these multiple testing sites will occur in relatively close proximity to when we expect students to return to campus. And what we hope is for the majority of students that they'll actually get tested at one of these multiple locations around North Dakota before they actually physically come to campus. That way, if they could be identified, they can be isolated in their own hometown and not come to campus with all the secondary problems that involves. Once they're out of their isolation period, they can then come to the campus and re-engage in their learning activities. By the way, they will be provided with online instruction until such time as it's safe for them to come to campus. So the details of that are literally being finalized as we talk now and will be available in the very immediate future. Contact tracing will also be done. The Department of Health is gearing up and has already hired dozens of additional contact tracers so that the Department of Health, local public health units and so forth will be able to identify any contacts, whether they're in the student's hometown or if the students come onto campus. They will be able to be identified as well. We're also working on the important exchange of information that will occur between the university system and public health and vice versa, so that the universities will be aware when there's a positive so that they can react as well. The second part of the testing will occur subsequently, and this will be especially when students leave campus and then return, or when athletic teams leave campus and return. The testing plan that would follow this initial wave of testing in August is being worked on, and we anticipate hearing the details of it from the Department of Health early in August, so that we will then know not only about the testing for the return to campus in a couple of weeks, but also what happens throughout the fall semester. So that's a brief overview, Chair Hacker, of where we stand on the testing and contact tracing issues, as well as the activities of the task force. I know that an additional item that you're going to be discussing subsequently relates to mask issues, and issues like that have obviously been discussed substantially by the task force and by the various member institutions. So I think at this point, I'll pause to see if there's anything, Chair Hacker, that you want me to address as well, or if you want me to take any questions. But I'll pause at this point, awaiting direction from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Really appreciate your work and your efforts. That was a good update of where we're at today, in particular as it relates to testing and contact tracing. Why don't we open this up for kind of an open question Q&A session, and then unless you'd like to turn over to Mr. Vern Dosh, or should we wait on that and see what the questions that get posed?
Chair Hacker, members, yeah, I would suggest let's just see what the questions are, because for a lot of the technical aspects, I will of course have to rely on Mr. Dosh's expertise.
Yes, let's do that. Board members, other interested presidents, sort of questions do we have at this stage? We're T-minus about less than 4 weeks at this point.
This is Liz Legursky. Chairman Hacker, I have a question.
Right ahead.
So I had talked to some folks who are on the smaller university working group, and I know plans are being finalized for the testing prior to students returning to campus, and we were kind of looking at the tentative schedule for that. And I noticed that some of the smaller institutions are scheduled sort of further out from the start of the first day of the semester in comparison to like some of the larger campuses. So I think there were some concerns there about if the tests are happening too far out, then they might not necessarily be good indicators of safety for when students come back. So I'm wondering if there's information on that, if we can maybe bump them closer to the start of the semester, or what the thought behind that was.
Thank you, Liz. That's really a logistics question. Why don't we turn that, Josh, over to Vern?
Yeah, I was just about to say that because I really didn't plant that question, but as you'll hear from Mr. Dosh's response, the Department of Health heard that concern and adjusted accordingly. So Vern, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Chairman Hacker, before I answer that question, I just wanted to extend a sincere note of thanks to this board. Dr. Nguyen talked about the different parties that are involved in the development and the execution of this plan, but I just want to say thanks to the university system. Your employees have been extraordinarily responsive. Jerry and Carol, I so appreciate the way they've responded to the questions as we've done a lot of studies to try to figure out the very best way to promote this. Also, thank you to Dr. Wynn. I'm not sure how he does it, but he is as responsive as anyone that I've dealt with. And I'm so grateful for that because this has all been moving at kind of pandemic speed. So to answer the question, we floated an initial test schedule about 8 or 10 days ago to the task force. And it was our first attempt at trying to accommodate what is a bit of a daunting task, and that is to onboard 42,000 individuals as close as we possibly can to the start date, because that is a valid concern. You want to be as close as you can to make sure that we've caught all the students as they arrive on campus. So what we did based on the feedback that we had, particularly with some of the smaller universities, colleges, was to readjust that schedule. The schedule that I originally floated, or that we vetted with the task force, had about 33 events around the state. And we've almost doubled the number of events, testing events, to include beyond the 8 major cities, to include some of the smaller cities that were a concern. We're trying to provide coverage across the state to make it easy for the students to be tested before they leave for the campus, but also realizing that there's a limited amount of resources that we're trying to utilize. And this, again, Dr. Wynn did a nice job of responding, but I mean, this is a collaborative effort between Department of Health, the university systems, local public health, the National Guard, and General Dorman have played an incredible role in this. Absolutely, we couldn't have executed this without them. So we heard your concerns. There is a new schedule that was just released about 15 minutes ago. That will be presented to the task force tomorrow and hopefully ready for distribution.
Thank you, Vern.
Thank you. This is Member Bai. You're doing absolutely an incredible job, and I'm so appreciative of the work that you're doing. What sort of, are there any sort of special accommodations for out of state or international students?
Vern, why don't you take that, please?
Okay. We have looked at those numbers, and they're fairly substantial. The technology for testing right now, all of the testing we're doing is PCR testing, and you've all probably seen other technologies from a breathalyzer type to immediate point of presence test. All of those tests seem to be in development, but we're just not comfortable that they will be ready. We have validated some of those tests. We want them to be accurate. Our preference would be to have a solution where we could mail those test kits ahead to particularly the out-of-state and the international students. Honestly, I think we'd be pushing the technology if we tried this with this initial wave of onboarding, although we are continuing work in that area to see if perhaps that is an alternative for us as these students come back in January. So what we are doing is we have done some studies that identify where the out-of-state students are coming from. As you would imagine, there's quite an influx, particularly from Minnesota. We are doing an outreach within a 60-mile radius of East Grand Forks and Fargo, encouraging those students that will arrive on our North Dakota campuses to take advantage of the testing events either in Grand Forks or Fargo. So we're making every effort to reach out, including having substantial staff available during registration times to know full well that not everyone is going to get tested in their hometown. And for those out-of-state and international students, they probably didn't have that option. So we will have significant testing events, as you can imagine, between the 20th and the 23rd. It's pretty well all hands on deck, providing testing events as well as testing on site at some of the universities.
One of the things that we hope will help in the recurrent training as we get further into the fall semester, as Vern suggested, is newer diagnostic tests. You may be aware that the National Institutes of Health has a very active program going on, supported by $1.5 billion of our federal taxpayer dollars, to do what they're calling their RADX program, RADX, Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics, where they're trying to develop what we call point-of-care diagnostic tests so that we can test students, faculty, and staff literally on campus and get a result in 15 minutes or a half an hour that will directly address your question. That's not going to be ready for the August time, but the NIH believes that these will become commercially available sometime this fall. So that will incredibly facilitate testing as we get further into this calendar year. For now, those are not optimal. So the PCR test that Vern mentioned is what is going to be used. But given the change in testing sites and frequency, we hope that most of the students will be able to be accommodated. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Just a quick follow-up question. The current testing protocol takes about 48 hours to process. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. All the testing that we're talking about here would be performed, the rendering would be performed at the North Dakota State Lab. And generally, you know, to get the tests, the samples couriered into the lab from the various locations around the state, that lab has moved to a 3-shift environment now. So they're literally working around the clock. We are installing additional equipment. By the end of this month, we will be going from 5,000 tests a day capacity to 8,000. And again, a lot of that is to accommodate the efforts that we're talking about here. So the other part of that is once the tests are rendered, is the notification. And on all positives, they would receive a phone call from the scientist that is conducting the test at the lab. We are working, Dr. Wynn alluded to this, but we are working with the university system on a agreement that allows us as the health department to be able to inform the local, the campus, a representative from the campus, that we have identified a positive. So that protocol and those legal agreements are being worked on as we speak. For the majority of the tests that are rendered that are negative, we are deploying a system that at the time of registration for the test, we will be asking for an email address or a phone number for text messages, and also garnering the tested individual's permission to render those results electronically. So rather than making 8,000 phone calls a day to tell people that they're negative and the challenges that would go along with that, we will have the ability to deliver those results electronically, and it will be a clickable link that you can click on, and it will bring up a PDF of your test results on health department letterhead, so that if you need to have tangible indication of your test results for an employer or something like that, that would be available. But that is the way we are working to leverage that technology to get that information out as quickly as possible, particularly for the students that haven't been tested when they arrive on campus.
Thank you. That's a lot of work that you're doing that will be very valuable and speed everything up. I'm assuming during this 48-hour processing period that the student, a student or whoever it is, will not be allowed on campus. That how does that work?
That
Vern, maybe
that, Dr. Wynn?
Yeah, why don't I take
please.
that? So
Thank you.
what our goal will be, and that's why Vern mentioned the timing of this, our goal is to try to get the test done as close to the time as when the student is coming to campus, but actually before they actually get on campus. So the optimal thing is the student gets his or her test 2 or 3 days prior to when they're coming to campus. So if they turn out to be positive, they will just shelter in place at their home location, and you know, the contact tracing will occur there and so forth, but they won't be on campus yet. So we're trying to the maximum degree that's possible to test as many students as we possibly can before they get to campus, so that we avoid the situation that you're referring to.
Thank you. And when we get to the situation that I'm referring to, how will that be handled?
Well, so if a student is on campus, for example, and they're waiting for a result, I don't think that any of the institutions have proposed that student would quarantine in some way. But if they then are notified that they're positive and the institution is notified that they're positive, all of the institutions have protocols in place for isolating that student, and then the contact tracing will be done through the Department of Health. So that will occur, we hope, to a very minimal degree, but that's when the contact tracing will kick in. The question that was asked earlier about the time from the test being done until getting the result is very appropriate here, because the Department of Health is working really hard to keep that time as short as possible for obvious reasons.
Thank you. Very helpful. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Great questions, Anita. I think a lot of us were wondering many of the same things. Any other questions for Josh or Vern?
This is Rita Mattern. I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Is there a plan or a process for notifying a campus of positive results? And I'm specifically talking about, will campus employees be made aware that there are these positive cases of students? And then as a part to that, my understanding is that current positive cases are assigned based on mailing addresses. So when these students are living on a campus, it might not necessarily be in the same county where their mailing address is. So how will that look in the reporting that's issued by the state every day?
Vern, do you want to try to address the second one, and then maybe I'll try the first part of the question?
Sure. So today, when we're collecting the demographic information of the person being tested, we ask if they're a student, and that's as far as we went. In our early discussions with the task force, it was really clear that we would have to be able to break down that information to the individual campus. So in process is a software change in the Dynamics contact tracing software and also the test registration software, that at the time of registration, whether it's online, if the student gets on and they're on their smartphone or they're on their laptop at home, and they fill out that information before they get to the testing event, or if they come to the testing event not having registered, the demographic information will include the specific institution. So we're going to say, are you a student? Yes. Okay, what institution do you go to? And then we would indicate the institution, so that once we have the test results, we will be able to, you know, if we have a positive, we'll be able to say, okay, that individual goes to this institution. We're working on the agreements today that allow the Department of Health to reach out to a single point of contact at each university that will be responsible for the dissemination of that information and launching the protocol, as Dr. Nguyen explained, that says, okay, we've got a positive, we've got to get them into a quarantine area and such. So those software changes to accommodate this situation they've actually been completed and they're in testing this week. We are working to make sure that's available as we begin these testing events around the state.
As far as the first question about notification, first the disclaimer. Obviously, there is certain information that cannot be generally released due to privacy concerns, FERPA, HIPAA, and other considerations, because this is personal information and health information. Having said that, each campus has its own policies and procedures to how to notify the campus of what's going on campus. I think as a general approach, many of us would feel that trying to be as open with the campus as to what's going on is the best approach, again, within the privacy limits of health information. I think that, quite frankly, the governor has set a good example in his press conferences about talking about state data and yet without jeopardizing the identity of any specific individual. So I think that we would in general encourage campuses to be as sharing of information as they can be, subject to the limitation imposed by law and common sense, as far as not wanting to stigmatize a particular individual. The health department has substantial leeway given the public health emergency that is ongoing, but that does not necessarily extend to just casually letting everyone know that that Joe Smith or Mary Green has the COVID infection. So where there's a need to know, the Department of Health uses that information. For others, we think it is in general good practice to keep the campus as informed as possible. They should know what's going on, but within the limits, as I said, of common sense and the legal constraints that that are there for a good reason, which is to protect our privacy and personal information. I hope that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you.
It's member by.
Chair Hacker, this is the Chancellor. If I could just.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, this isn't the question. Go ahead. Next question. Sorry.
This is member by, and if Dr. Nguyen, as I understood if I understood correctly, most of the work has been looking at the initial testing, and that if I understood correctly, the protocols for how to continue testing once the students are on campus are still being developed. Did I hear that correctly?
Chair Hacker, member by, yes, you heard it exactly correctly, that obviously the recurrent testing is an issue and those efforts are ongoing. As a matter of fact, it will be, again, a topic of discussion at tomorrow's task force meeting, because there will be different expectations and different requirements on different campuses depending upon their student catchment area, athletic teams, and so forth. Given the high priority of getting this initial wave of testing done, the secondary testing has been, quite frankly, a secondary concern, and that's why further details on that plan will take another week or 2 or 3 to fully tease out. But those efforts are ongoing and will be forthcoming in plenty of time for everyone to prepare for it. The focus clearly has been on this huge undertaking of the initial testing. That has obviously kept people going 24/7 to get ready for that. But there has been a simultaneous effort, although not with the same time urgency, to deal with the recurrent testing. So you will hear the details of that once we work it out with all the campuses, Department of Health, local health departments, and so forth over the next very few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair Hacker, if I could, if there's no other questions, I just wanted to thank the volunteer spirit of Dr. Wynn and also Doug Darling, Steve Shirley, and Mike Bohr and Eric Plummer. This is a classic example where if each campus did their own thing, we would overwhelm Vern Dosh and the National Guard with 11 people calling. There are times when campus-specific things happen to happen, and that's part of when the students show up. But these type of things where we build a task force is absolutely crucial. And thank you again for establishing it, Chair Hacker.
You bet. One additional point that I think we want to make, Dr. Wynn, is these are all really great questions, and communication is key, including communication with our students and faculty and staff. And much of that's kind of started. Am I correct, Dr. Wynn? Campuses are starting to have already reached out and began communicating and messaging many of their individual plans to students.
Chair Hacker, that's absolutely correct. I can tell you for sure, since I know the most about UND, that we've already reached out to student leadership, Greek leadership, and so forth about these issues. Once we get the finalized schedule, and as Mr. Dosh mentioned, it was just released, then we can now get very granular with the students, so the students can work with their fellow students in actually engaging them to be tested and so forth. So I think that now that we have that final schedule, we're going to encourage our students to really help with the ownership, if you will, of this. It's part of their responsibilities as adult citizens. And I think the students never cease to amaze me with their ability to step up to a task when you engage them as colleagues and fellow adults. I've rarely been disappointed. So I'm very encouraged that as we now can follow through with the more granular aspects of the plan, that they're going to step up and really be even more effective than we will be in convincing their fellow students of the importance of this.
Couldn't agree more, and I do believe exactly what you're saying, Dr. Wynn, and how we engage and encourage students. And I would just add that communication between the institution, the student leaders, and with all students is just really critical at this time, and appreciate all the work the institutions have already done to communicate with their students. So thank you.
Well, and Chair Hacker, it even goes beyond just the institutions. So as an example, Dr. Stahl, the director of the Department of Health and the chief health officer for the state, asked me for a list of all of the student leaders throughout the university system, because he is in the process of calling all of them to thank them for their efforts, to engage them in the process, and so forth. So it isn't just the university system. We're getting the same sort of cooperation and support throughout the state, and I'm very grateful for Dr. Stahl's efforts to reach out to student leadership on each and every one of the campuses throughout the university system.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Nguyen or Vern Dosh?
Chair Hacker, this is Erica Solberg. I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Awesome. So many students live in their campus locations full time, you know, if their parents live there or if they have internships and stay there year round. What plan is established for students who test positive in their campus locations and may live with other students or maybe with their family?
So Chair Hacker, members, so that is an example of something where each campus has their own plan to how to deal with that, dependent on the particular housing and other situations on that particular campus. So it really would be campus specific. All of the campuses have thought about this and have approaches to it, but it would vary as to whether you're at Williston State or the University of North Dakota. But one of the important parts of it is the same concept of test, identify, isolate, and then contact trace. So that is those components are essential. So when a student tests positive, and it isn't if, students will test positive. If they're in a congregate living situation, it will be important for that student to be isolated and all of the contacts to be quarantined. We know this approach works, and where the students will be housed and so forth is going to vary depending upon the campus. UND has certain specific plans that may not be reasonable in Williston, is the example that I used, and vice versa. But there are specific plans at each campus as how that will be handled when it occurs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. You're welcome.
Any other questions for Dr. Nguyen or Vern Dosh? We have some action items coming up under item number 3 to support these efforts. Well, Dr. Nguyen, I think we have a wonderful plan and almost nearly in place with scheduling coming out and the communication and approach. I don't think it could have been done any better in the middle of a pandemic. And so thank you so much again for your service. And Vern, thank you. You know, I know you attempted to slide into retirement, and appreciate you answering the call and jumping in to help our state's leadership and the governor's office with this very important issue and task. Your service is greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, there's no action needed on item number 2, but that will bring us to item number 3. And this is additional beyond testing items, as well as endorsement of the testing strategy. And I'm going to turn this over to the Chancellor and Eric Olson. If Eric was able to join us, I didn't hear him immediately on the call. But let's take these one at a time. They're all individually important. And so can we start, Eric?
Well, yeah, just real quick for the board members, I want to thank Chair Hacker. I think we talk about every night of the week, and thank you for taking my call later last night. You know, we were also featured, Josh and I, with the governor's press conference yesterday. Chair Hacker was traveling and couldn't make it. So lots of things are going on. I want to thank my staff and again the task force for all this. But also, I can't say enough how important the board is and the following items we have here. I've had several presidents express the need for the things that you'll see on the list here, but also it just shows leadership that the state board, which is charged with the responsibility ultimately of the students and the campus systems, is out in front helping where they can. So I'll turn it over to Eric to go on item A, then jump back. I'll have a few comments on B, and we'll cycle back and forth because lots of these obviously involve legal considerations. So Eric, over to you about the liability and where we stand.
Thank you, Chancellor. The first piece of this item number 3 is a question regarding legal liability protections. This was an issue that has been raised at a number of state and federal levels since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared, and so I was asked to look into what sort of the prognosis was of a liability shield that would protect our campuses from liability related to the pandemic outbreak, and so I'm happy to present a report on that. There are sort of 3 points I'm going to hit on. The first is the prospect of a federal liability shield. The federal liability protections have been raised as early as March of this year, but they were not included in any of the prior coronavirus relief bills, including the CARES Act. However, there is currently negotiations ongoing over what would be the 5th coronavirus relief package to be passed by Congress. That is currently in negotiations between the House Democrats and the Senate Republicans. The last version of this package that was described by the Senate leadership included a broad 5-year liability shield for protections for actions taken in response to the coronavirus pandemic for healthcare providers, businesses, and higher education institutions, as well as K-12 institutions from December of 2019 through December of 24. So that would be a retroactive protection. So far, the House leadership has opposed those liability protections, but it seems likely that there will be a compromise of some kind based on recent statements. Assuming that the legislation the protections that were proposed most recently by Senate leadership would be carried into effect, those would likely protect defendants in lawsuits, so those healthcare providers, businesses, higher education institutions, and others as well, so long as they act in good faith and do not recklessly, willfully, or intentionally expose customers, clients, or employees to COVID-19. There's also consideration of another provision which would either permit or require COVID-related lawsuits to be brought in federal court. However, as these provisions are still being negotiated, it's really impossible to say or predict what an eventual compromise might look like. As the federal government has not moved on this issue yet, a number of states have passed protections against COVID-related liability, including North Dakota, North Carolina, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming. These statutes would accomplish much the same as what was proposed in the federal legislation, although some are a little bit broader, as in the case of North Carolina, or much more narrow, as in the case of Wyoming or Louisiana. Many states, including the above, those ones that I just mentioned, have also broadened the definition of covered claims for the purposes of workers' compensation insurance, meaning that exposure to coronavirus and becoming sick from coronavirus that you were exposed to at work would be a type of injury that would be covered by state workers' compensation programs, as opposed to through an employment lawsuit. As a result, employees would be limited to seeking workers' comp relief rather than filing lawsuits in state or federal court. Which brings us to where North Dakota currently stands. I was asked to look into the issue of how and whether a liability protection for the North Dakota university system could be implemented in North Dakota. The first possibility that I looked into was whether those protections could be implemented by executive order or under the governor's emergency authority. The liability of the state is set forth at North Dakota Century Code Chapter 32-12.2, and as a result, amending the specific provisions of that chapter would require legislative action. Similarly, the powers that are granted to the governor by the COVID public health emergency declaration would likely not support the issuance of an executive order accomplishing the type of liability protections which have been considered in other states or which would be helpful to higher education institutions. similarly, based on both my own, and this is speculation to a certain extent, based on my own analysis as well as discussions that I have had, I have no reason to anticipate that a special session of the legislature would be called to address this issue, although both the governor and the legislative assembly would theoretically have the power to do that, as there are remaining legislative days from the last session. However, under these circumstances, the most likely opportunity for the NDUS to receive liability protections would either occur pursuant to federal legislation or through legislative action at the next session, which begins in January. At this time, there's been some discussion about whether there would be support from other parts of state government or from the private sector for these types of protections. I know that the North Dakota Chamber of Commerce has been working very diligently to work on this from the private sector perspective, and then also I know that there is support for this in some other branches of the state government as well. It's just a matter of getting a bill and getting it sponsored, and then the fact that we're 5 months away from the session beginning. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions with respect to liability. To the extent that today the state board would like to take action on this question of liability, I believe that probably the appropriate action to take would be to authorize the chancellor and state board leadership, as well as potentially institutional leadership, to work with state government and federal representatives to encourage the passage of this type of liability protection that I've discussed today. But I'd of course be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Board members, do you have questions for Eric or suggestions?
This is Joe Wetch. I do have a question.
Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, Eric, one of the things that I was wondering about during the presentation that you just made was the limit of liability for the North Dakota University system. Is there a limit of liability that would be found in statute that would protect us in the event that federal legislation or state legislation was not passed on limiting our legal liability?
Thank you, Member Wetch. Chair Hacker, members of the board, there is a limitation on state on damages that are paid by the state. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but there is a limitation in place, although it's not an insignificant number.
And if I could, Member Wetch, jump in. Several presidents asked for this work, and I want to thank Eric because he's been burning the midnight oil quite a bit on this. I think the consensus is we probably would win almost every case. However, the cost of defending all of this could be significant. And so part of a liability protection might reduce the number of and you would know the words better than I do, but nuisance lawsuits type of thing. So it's also that, to kind of clear the air, that we did best faith to operate, protect faculty, staff, and students, and provide some deterrent to, again, being pulled into courtrooms over a number of years.
Thank you.
Eric, one specific question as it relates to the cost of defense. Would that be covered under the risk management fund of the state?
Chair Hacker, that with some limitations, yes, that is the case. As long as an individual, a state employee, was acting within the scope of their authority and did not cause reckless, intentional, or willful injury, I believe those are the words in the statute, but it's to that effect at least, then risk management would assist with that defense. Now, I can't say for sure that every cost would be paid for. There are some limitations, but in principle, yes, the state risk management fund would respond to those claims on behalf of the system.
Great, thank you.
And the institutions.
Yep, thank you. Board members, I think this is something worthy of pursuing to protect the institutions. And so I think we would need action, as Eric suggested, if there's a desire to do so by the board.
Chair Hacker, this is Member Louders. I'll offer a motion, and Eric, please jump in and be sure that I capture all the elements you suggested. I'd like to make a motion to authorize the Chancellor, the system leadership, institutional officials to work with the state government and local representatives to ensure that legal issues and legal liability protections related to COVID-19 are in place. Eric, does that capture that?
Chair Louders, the only suggestion that I would make, addition that I would make, would also to work with the state's federal representatives as well.
Thank you. So I'll add that to that motion, working in concert with federal representatives as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. There's a motion. Is there a second?
This is Member 5. There's a second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion?
I have a question. This is Liz Legursky. If an institution decides to operate remotely, does that remove the risk of liability?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Legursky. It lowers the risk significantly, but there is still some positions that will be in person and on campus, and there is also potential liability issues related to decisions regarding any refunds or amount of repayment to students as a result of the decision to go online. So there are still issues. Well, there certainly would be less risk to the institutions in terms of the potential for lawsuits. There are still issues which would be present.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Okay, hearing none. Christy, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Louders?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Mahalik? I'm sorry, Ms. Bai?
Yes.
Mr. Wedge?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Solberg?
Yes.
Board Chair Hacker?
Yes. Thank you, Christy. The motion passes. That'll move us to item 3B, use of masks on campus. Chancellor.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hacker. This is obviously becoming a national and international debate, but there is definite movement nationally. The President of the United States has come out and basically recommended and endorsed masks as a patriotic duty. The science, and I don't think we need to get into Mr. Dr. Wynn, but the science is continuing to move in the direction that there's a benefit of this. Minnesota, I believe, has just put a mask mandate. So we convened the cabinet day before yesterday. There was one president who is very democratic on his campus, asked for feedback about a month ago. There was a preference to not use masks, but he is on board if the board would give direction that this is a preferred policy to adopt. So I would ask the board to help clear the air for all the campuses, because there is still some debate in North Dakota among the parents and students of the importance, and to send a signal, as you see in the attached materials, would be very welcomed by, I think the governor also would be welcoming this, but mainly your constituents, the presidents and the campus leadership. So Eric, over to you to explain the particulars of this instrument.
Thank you, Chancellor. Chair Hacker, members of the board, before the SBHE is a proposed resolution which would strongly encourage North Dakota university system institutions to implement policies and/or procedures to require or expect the use of face coverings in appropriate situations. Based on the best available medical advice from the NDUS's medical advisors, an exhibit is attached to the resolution, which is the third page, Exhibit A, that includes recommended provisions for the policies and procedures governing the use of face coverings. The resolution does leave discretion to the institution presidents to set the specific terms of their face covering policies in light of differences in personnel, facilities, mission, resources, and other characteristics of the 11 institutions, while still providing system-wide guidance. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the particulars of the resolution.
Thank you, Eric. Board members, this was developed in coordination with the task force.
Chair Hacker, this is Casey.
Yeah, go
I
ahead,
would
Casey.
move that we adopt the recommendation as put forth in for the use of masks on campus.
Chair Hacker, this is Member Louders. I'll second that.
Thank you. There's a motion and
Chair
a
Hacker,
second. Go ahead.
Chair Hacker, this is Eric Olson. I just a point of information for Dr. Ryan. Just the question is whether I believe you said recommendation, but your motion was to approve the resolution.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion on the motion and the second for the use of masks on campus and to have the institutions adopt policies? Hearing none. Well, and personally, I think this is critically important, especially because considering the density of the population that occurs when class is being resumed. So I appreciate all the work that everybody's put on this. There's a motion and a second. So I'm not hearing any other discussion. Christy, if you would call the roll.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Ms. Louders,
Yes.
Ms. Bai,
Yes.
Ms. Nesset,
Yes.
Mr. Wetch,
Yes.
Ms. Solberg,
Yes.
Board Chair Hacker.
Yes. Thank you very much. That'll bring us to item 3C, which we discussed at length, the testing strategy. Chancellor or Eric?
Yeah, real quick, and then I'll turn over to Eric. We did talk in detail on that. I want to thank Mr. Dosh for making himself available. Again, you know, this is a crucial element to reducing risk, as I think Dr. Ryan has said on many occasions. There will be infections, and we'll have responsive adaptive strategies for that, which is one of the topics tomorrow. But we believe it's important the state board, you know, express appreciation and endorse the strategies that are being developed by the Department of Health. But if I could also then brief item D, is that given the number of Minnesota students, which is close to 10,000 will be arriving, we were hopeful that Minnesota would have a robust testing program that could help screen those students as they begin to travel across borders. But as we see, the governor's had to institute a face mask policy, I believe day before yesterday. The situation could be dynamic depending on what happens in the big urban areas. So we also want to express the state board's desire that campuses work with the Department of Health to phase the arrival as needed onto campus. And I believe both of the big campuses already have somewhat of a phased arrival, but that there may be a need for some more flexibility depending on how the situation would develop across the border. So Eric, did you want to add a few particulars to the 2 points?
Thank you, Chancellor. Chair Hacker, members of the board, I don't have a lot to add to this one. I just wanted to again thank Dr. Wynn and Mr. Dosh and other members, along with my colleagues at in the university system who provide legal advice, as well as the Department of Health's attorney, for working very hard and very quickly to make this process work. In particular, there's been a lot of issues regarding how to best handle information sharing within the boundaries of HIPAA, FERPA, and state law. And I think that with all of this work from all of these people and these groups, we will have all of those issues wrapped up in the next few days, and that will make it much easier and much more efficient for the institutions and the Department of Health to share information.
Thanks, Eric.
So I would be.
What do we need on these two items? What are we looking for?
I would be happy to offer a motion for the board's consideration.
Great.
Okay. I would suggest a motion that the SBHE endorses and supports the North Dakota Department of Health's proposed testing strategy as outlined by Dr. Wynn and Mr. Dosh, and then also encourage the institutions to work with the Department of Health to ensure the availability of testing capacity to the greatest extent possible, including as necessary by offering flexibility of arrival dates on campus.
Okay, Eric, thank you for that. I do want to pose one question. You said a lot. Is this requiring the change of arrival dates for certain institutions? I'm going to give you an example. We might have a very small institution and the capacity may be easily accommodated. Our excuse me, our institutions are all very different. You're just saying that we're granting them the flexibility to determine arrival date and start date for their campus, correct? Not requiring them to start differently? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hacker. Yeah, no, this would only be to encourage flexibility where necessary.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So just to clarify, this is Liz Ligursky again. So are we talking about the official start date or just when students come to campus?
Ms. Ligursky,
Chancellor, I'll chime in. Yeah. No, the official start date would stay the same, the 24th of August, but we want to basically give full support to the presidents that, for example, if they've got a month to go. In fact, I've got a colleague who's in another state that they are down to assigning the times that each person arrives in dorm rooms, and they're spreading out the arrival on campus over a 6-day period to reduce crowding. So if the campuses needed to slide some things to match up with the resources of the Department of Health testing, they would have the support of the board. But the official start date would be the 24th of August as in the calendar.
Thank you for the clarification.
Chair Hacker, this is Casey. I'm going to make a motion that the State Higher Board of Education endorses the North Dakota Health Department testing strategy, working with all those involved, and that we also appreciate that campuses can work on phased arrival for students and testing.
Thank you, Casey.
And this is member by Eric. Does that cover everything that needs to be covered in that motion?
Member by Chair Hacker, I think it does cover what I was looking for.
Great.
Okay. Then with that, I'll second.
Great. There's a motion and a second. Any other further discussion on 3C and D? Hearing none. Christy, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Wedge?
Yes.
Ms. Louders?
Yes.
Ms. Solberg?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Ms. Bai?
Yes.
Board Chair Hacker?
Yes. Thank you. The motion passes. I'm sure the state leadership will be appreciative of that effort. What brings us to item number 4, which is a second reading of the new Title IX policies. Eric, we've spent some time on this. Can we do that one a brief highlight?
Yes, Chair Hacker, thank you. Members of the board, I'm not planning on going through the full policies this time. We've discussed them at great length at many committees and at last month's board meeting as well. I will just note that since last month's meeting, I've had some questions regarding the requirements of the policy. I've not had any requests for changes or substantive edits suggested. I do have on the phone. We do have on the phone today Lisa Dooley, who is the Title IX coordinator at Minot State, to give some feedback and thoughts and comments on the implementation of the Title IX policy. She was also on the line back in June, but due to time constraints, due to the length of that meeting, was unable to to provide her feedback at that time. So I'd like to offer her the chance if the board is agreeable.
You bet, Ms. Dooley, go right ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Hacker, members of the board. For the record, I am Lisa Dooley, the Title IX coordinator at Minot State University, and in this role I also assist with Title IX matters at Dakota College at Bottineau. I appreciate your interest in this important subject and the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you today. The new Title IX regulations will impact the handling of cases of sexual harassment and sexual violence by all campuses in North Dakota. The government's strict timeline requiring implementation by August 14, 2020 adds additional challenges and stress, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic, as institutions confront fundamentally difficult questions such as how to safely reopen in the fall. A major concern with the regulations is that they impose a prescriptive, one-size-fits-all judicial-like process and assumes that institutions are a reasonable substitute for our legal system. Institutions can no longer utilize a single investigative model, but conduct live hearings. Institutions are now required to ask at least 3 separate officials to carry out different steps of the Title IX complaint process. Statements made by parties and not examined, not cross-examined as part of the Title IX investigation may not be used as evidence. In the end, the new regulations offer more protections for the respondents, in other words, the accused, in sexual harassment cases, while discouraging alleged victims from coming forward by mandating they be subjected to cross-examination. Hearings must be conducted in real time. Upon the request of either party, the hearing may be conducted by video conference with the parties in separate rooms. However, all participants, including parties, advisors, witnesses, decision makers, must be able to see and hear each other. The hearings will be recorded, but not open to the public. A decision maker is not the Title IX coordinator or investigator involved in the investigation, but must preside over the hearing. The decision makers is tasked with reaching a determination regarding responsibility by applying the standard of evidence the institution has designated for use in all formal complaints of sexual harassment. Advisors must conduct cross-examination of the parties and any additional witnesses. Institutions are required to provide advisors for those who do not have them, meaning each institution would likely have to retain a minimum of 2 advisors throughout the hearing process. Decision makers must evaluate the evidence and are prohibited by drawing inferences about responsibilities based on the party's failure or refusal to appear at a hearing or answer cross-examination. It is worth noting investigators, decision makers, and potential advisors must now undergo extensive new Title IX training on all applicable evidentiary requirements, standards of proof, and relevant state and local laws. And these training materials must also be available to the and posted on the school's website. At the hearing's conclusion, the decision makers must provide, quote, a statement of and rationale for the result as to each allegation, end quote. Either party can appeal the decision based on procedural irregularity, new evidence, or bias on the part of the investigators or decision makers. This warrants additional personnel not originally involved in the matter to be assigned as appeal decision makers, thereby requiring further trained personnel. Another concern is the effect of establishing the evidentiary standard of proof used in all campus disciplinary hearings. The new regulations offer a choice of either preponderance of evidence or clear evidence as the standard for Title IX grievance proceedings. A campus that selects preponderance must adopt it in all other campus proceedings that carry the same disciplinary penalty. Further is the narrowing of the definition of sexual harassment and lowering the standards to which federal government holds campuses. The new regulations place unreasonable restrictions on what Title IX coordinators can and cannot investigate, and further allow institutions to ignore reports of sexually harassing conduct occurring off campus, where the recipient doesn't exercise substantial control over both the respondent and the context in which the harassment occurs. For example, for a complainant to be heard, the alleged sexual misconduct must now take place in the United States, on campus, or if off campus in the context of a school-sponsored activity, building, or event in which the institution controls. A campus may, however, continue to address harassing conduct that does not meet the purview of sexual harassment under its non-Title IX policies or codes of conduct. Also, the new regulations mean if the conduct is severe but not pervasive, it is not included in the wrongful conduct, or if it's pervasive but not severe. In closing, this is what I suggest as a few prudent steps in light of the new regulations. Revise or create new sexual harassment complaint and investigation policies and appeal procedures to ensure they meet the protocols mandated by the new regulations. Determine how to allocate the funding needed within the institution's budget to implement the department's directives. Lastly, identify what additional personnel may be needed to effectively implement and support Title IX policy and procedures, which could prompt hiring considerations or shifts in existing personnel and their roles. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lisa. And I assume that you've been coordinating with the other Title IX coordinators and HRC, etc.
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate your work. Thank you very much. This is a massive change. Board members, any questions?
Chair Hacker, this is Member Louders. I think we've discussed this policy at length. I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading of policy 520 Title IX and the related policies as impacted letters A through J.
Thank you, Member Louders. Much appreciated. Is there a second?
Chair Hacker, this is Casey. I would second that motion.
Thank you very much. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Christy, if you would call the roll.
Ms. Bai? Ms. Bai?
Please come back to me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Wetch?
Yes.
Ms. Louders?
Yes.
Ms. Solberg?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Ms. Bai?
Yes.
Board Chair Hacker?
Yes, thank you very much. That will bring us to item number 5 on our agenda. And as I mentioned when we kicked the call off, we would do some update and get caught up as we move into our retreat that is planned for September. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry in Jerry's new role. Jerry, I'm sorry, I'm missing your title. I apologize for that. So why don't you kick it off with your new role? Yeah, Vice Chancellor of Strategy. Thank you, Chancellor. Welcome, Jerry. Congratulations, and we're ready for you to take it over.
All right, thank you, Chair Hacker. I'm just getting the video, the slides brought up here. Just give me, there they are. Okay, Vice Chancellor for Strategy and Strategic Engagement. Thank you for the time. We'll make this as quickly as possible. Chair Hacker wanted to bring on the strategic plan that's pretty much written, but we wanted to go through and review it and make sure we got it correct, particularly with a few new board members on. So to start with, the strategic planning process was a lengthy one. It wasn't something that was done overnight. The crew, Vice Chancellor Phil Wisecup, my predecessor, Chris Erickson and Billy Joe Lorius from our staff spent a lot of time and effort on this. They included the Envision 2030 document that was done 2016. We looked at 5-year cycles for the strategic plan. There was a higher learning requirement and a lapse back in 2014, so we wanted to make sure we got that corrected. There were campus visits. The three Wisecup, Erickson, and Lorius visited all the campuses over the past 12 months. They conducted surveys, they asked for input, and so it was a comprehensive development of information that went into building the plan. I'm going to move to the next slide, and Chris will pick it up from here because he was more involved on it, and since I'm new to the Vice Chancellor role, he's got more of the background and experience.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Rosted. Chair Hacker, board members, this will be just a brief overview of the initiative, the Envision 2030 initiative, and how it kind of feeds into our current cycle. So Envision 2030 started with an educational summit in May of 2016 that had a morning full of speakers, leadership speakers on education, followed by an afternoon of breakout sessions. And those breakout sessions were related to students that's graduating into the workforce and students as they existed and their needs on campuses. And those topics on the workforce side of things were agriculture, energy, healthcare, manufacturing, and technology. On the campus side of things, it was diversity, liberal arts and humanities, tomorrow's student, focusing on the changing needs of students, and the whole student, which covered a lot of non-academic needs. After those breakout sessions reported their findings, later on reflection of it, our team at the time came to an understanding that we were going to need to put together advisory groups on all of these teams, staffed with industry professionals and campus representation. And so we did that for each of those topics. And at Chair Hacker's recommendation, we also instituted a 10th advisory team on law and legal systems, because those 6 workforce groups were of the biggest impact to the economy of our state. So those groups got put together in late 2016 and reported out in 2017 by the time the board met for its annual meeting. And those reports offered insightful recommendations on the subject matters gathered in those topical areas, and really helped feed our strategic planning effort as we move forward. Some of those recommendations ended up becoming priorities even in the new strategic review. So that transition happened over time, and those reports helped feed our new transition into the current planning cycle, which started, we started planning about a year and a half ago of what the process was going to look like. Visited all 11 campuses, got probably minimum a couple dozen people at every single campus that provided us pretty dynamic and robust feedback, but there were themes that emerged there. And so those themes were brought forward into the new strategic review, and we try and place them under these different goals that the board had settled on in the during the previous planning stage for the 2015-2020 cycle. Now, during that time, the board had settled on 4 goals and ordered them 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see. And later on, I believe in 2017, the board chose to add goal 5 related to research. So the board can reorder goals here as you move forward, and you can add or subtract goals and metrics. That is your privilege as we move forward. And I will, I think, turn it back over to Jerry as we come into the drivers of change and then what the metrics will be for your review today.
Just needed to unmute. Yeah, so the significant drivers of change, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. We spent the first majority of today's meeting talking about COVID-19, how we're reacting to it. The digital revolution, that continues to take place, and this is a perfect example. We're not meeting face to face. We're working and learning from home, and that's going to continue. The Western North Dakota Resource Challenge, it's you know, having the ability to have higher ed more prevalent out in the western part of the state, and then responding to oil and ag prices as they fluctuate and expand and contract. The fiscal environment instability related to clearly the pandemic and what's going to happen with the future budgets, particularly here in North Dakota, and we live and breathe on oil and ag, so that certainly ties into that. Growth of knowledge in all areas, from STEM through arts and humanities. I'm just reading these off, but changes in North Dakota demographics. We're seeing changes in age, gender, and ethnicity. And so, you know, those are all the drivers of change that fell into, you know, putting this together and really coming up with a strategic plan and a strategy going forward with all these influences that are significant for higher ed in North Dakota. So with that, we developed, and this infographic describes the 5 goals, and then underneath the goals are some individual, more specific goals, and then below that, it all ties together. And in visiting with Chair Hacker a few weeks back after the board meeting in June, he wanted to come back and take a look at these and go through the goals 1 and 2. We're going to go through today, and then we can review goals 3, 4, and 5 in August, and just make sure if there's any questions or any issues with them that we get them squared away for everybody. So with goals 1 and 2, I'll put them on the screen. Again, goal 1 is to deliver degrees that are best value in the nation. Underneath the goal 1 is ensure the price to attend NDUS institutions is clearly stated and regionally competitive. And number 2 is standardized categories of mandatory and fees and strengthen the policies. And Chair Hacker, if it's okay with you, I can turn it over to you, and you wanted to have some conversation with the board.
Yeah, so today is really a high level to talk about these things, and at our retreat, we'll talk about some of the results and whether or not these need to continue to be our goals. They're not listed, as I think Jerry mentioned, in a priority order 1 through 5. They were all priorities. I do know many institutions that are now providing information to prospective students about what the cost of attendance is, what that could mean for student loans, including ability to repay. And finally, at some level, I think some institutions are starting to get to the level of helping students understand that this is the cost, this is the ability to repay, and this is also the likely wage type of scenario with a degree in that field. Is that correct, Jerry? I mean, they are continuing to work towards this goal.
Yeah, Chris, you were probably more involved and can you help with that?
Yes, I had to step away. My dog was barking. Sorry, Chair Hacker, can you repeat the question? I'd be happy to answer it.
We are making progress on goal 1.
Absolutely.
And ensuring we're being more transparent and providing guidance to our students as they look at different career paths or college choices.
Yes, sir. That's true. The campuses are making headway with that, and I believe these goals, all the metrics should be able to be tracked through strategic planning online, and that's how we track the progress on each and every one of these goals, whether they're on delivering degrees that are affordable or providing programs people want. So that may differ at each campus level if there were areas that they had to catch up in or not, and so we can specifically find how much progress has been made under each goal if you would like us to dig into the SPOL on that one.
And Chair Hacker, I'm sorry, I couldn't get my mute button either. But one of the key things that we have picked up is the price is crucial to certain parts of the country, of our state, where incomes are less. I mean, we're into the 2nd year of an agricultural recession. Now we have oil workers displaced. So, we want to be affordable. And right now, North Dakota is doing very well, and the 4-year schools and the research schools are below the regional average. At the community colleges, our costs are higher, but that's where the goal is written about value, because we've got a couple community colleges ranked recently in the top 20 in America by the Chronicle of Higher Education. So, it's one of those things, trying to be affordable to families that are struggling. And let's face it, the COVID and the hit to the economy is going to be being more premium on affordability, but we also want quality. So I think the camps are doing a really nice job threading, that needle, so to speak.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Jerry. Board members, any feedback? I always like to remind myself that price is only one part of value, and so much appreciated for the great work. Jerry, let's move on. Jerry, I think you're muted right now. We can't hear you on goal 2.
Sorry about that. I try to be very cognizant of muting when I'm not speaking. So Goal number 2 is provide programs people want, where and when they want them. Underneath that primary goal, it's to ensure programs are relevant, valuable, and timely, meet North Dakota's workforce needs through recruitment of students from traditional and non-traditional audiences, and then expand access through non-traditional delivery methods. Well, that third one obviously is through the COVID pandemic is certainly going to be expanded and has been expanded. I know, for an example, up at Minot State, they're going to have close to 100 video-enabled rooms to deliver coursework starting this fall. And that's quite an expansion, a lot of heavy lifting that's going on this summer. So trying to meet those goals obviously is already taking place, again, like we talked about with goal 1. Relevant, valuable, timely programs, those are obviously something the campuses are reviewing always anyway, but it is important to write those in as goals.
And if I could, Chair Hacker, one of the key drivers that we picked up from several legislators, Senator Beckedahl and Senator Shively, for sure, is something we discovered in Envision studies, and that was because of the historic concentration of universities in the East, and that was just an accident of history. You moved to settle the state east to west, that 34% of young people leave the West to go to the East. And so that's why we made it a priority to try to provide access to critical programs that are in need in those more remote Western areas. So we're trying to put it in terms of legislators can understand that we are listening to them and working hard to make more programs accessible so their students don't need to leave the West for their education. Because as they point out, many times they don't return.
Thank you, Chancellor. Is this the goal where we get to discuss online education?
Yeah.
Board members, we're obviously in a time of significant disruption, and there are a lot of forces at play. And we have a great strategic leader in our state, Governor Doug Burgum, and him and I have had some very deep conversations, and he joined for our strategy review. And I do think that we need to unpack this a little further and assist our institutions on how we improve, scale online education in the state of North Dakota. Obviously, we've flipped higher ed on its head with 11,000 courses going online in a matter of 2 weeks. So we've been there. Now it's a time of ensuring we have quality and ensuring that curriculum is the best curriculum there is for especially common courses across the system. And so I've challenged the Chancellor and Jerry to really think through a concept which we're tagging eCore, which is electronic curriculum online resources. Very similar to how OER completely disrupted the college textbook marketplace and almost obliterated it. It's just really unbelievable. We're now facing forces of free online education. And what does that mean for how we deliver quality education here in North Dakota? And eCore is maybe an idea that's going to take a lot of political will, because it would be sharing of online curriculum resources across the entire system so that we're not continually recreating the mousetrap, and that we're actually refining that mousetrap to make it the best there is. And so I have challenged them to think and discuss maybe some ideas around this that we will hopefully entertain at our retreat in September. I wanted you all to know because I had been talking to them about it, and it is a topic of that we should maybe think about.
Thank you. This is member by eCore. E stands for
electronic.
Got it.
So all
electronic curriculum.
Open resources.
Open resources. Okay, thank you.
We can call it whatever we want, really. I just dreamt that up, to be honest.
I like it. And this is Member By. Yes, these are disruptive times, and I would put an explanation point behind the importance of exploring this idea and how it will be make higher ed more accessible to more people in North Dakota and give us a competitive advantage.
Chair Hacker, this is Casey. I assume this will take a fair amount of discussion and that faculty will be active participants in the discussion.
Faculty are a critical component of that discussion. And I think there's ways to reward faculty for developing the best online curriculum there is too. And there could be financial incentives. And effectively, we could create a somewhat of a competitive marketplace and sharing of that content in an open format. Yeah, absolutely critical component.
This is just, this is Casey again. Can I ask what committee you're suggesting this would go to?
That's a great point, and I haven't even had a moment to talk to member Loiters. I would assume it would be an academic and student affairs type of topic.
I would certainly second that motion. I think it does belong with academics. And I think Member Louders has done excellent work with a variety of different challenges and would be very, very fair and good in moving that discussion forward, however it may end up.
That's all I have on these 1 and 2 slides or goals, and we'll come back next month and review goals 3 through 5, and then be prepped for the retreat in September, unless there's further discussion.
Jerry, thank you. This is a critical time for the board as we develop out that next 5-year plan. Something else that's really under consideration is a completely new strategic plan effort. And I think there's a unique opportunity to do that right on the heels as we start to see how things settle in after the pandemic of what our world looks like. And I would challenge us to reconsider an entirely new strategic plan initiative after this update and later possibly next year sometime.
Yeah, as I think as you and I talked about earlier, as the dust on COVID-19 settles and we know what our new world order kind of looks like, that it would be a perfect opportunity to take that up.
If I could, Chair Hacker, I just want to commend the board and campuses for what they've done, because several of the initiatives that have been adopted over the years, online, North Dakota is ranked as one of the top online university systems in the country, in the top 10. The digital programs, the governor, in case we didn't mention, did give a substantial amount of CARES money, $250,000 to kind of like the idea that Chair Hacker talked about, focused in the digital space of a compendium of digital courses that are hard to hire people. We're calling the Dakota Digital Academy. So I'd say we have a wonderful foundation to build on, but to support what Chair Hacker said, the ground is shifting underneath us, and we should be open to, if we need to extend the strategy review, potentially past September, if the ground is continuing to shift, so that we're not rushing to a decision if the concrete is still pouring into the molds.
Good point. Well, thank you, Chancellor, and Jerry, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our retreat and hoping we can keep that on track. That brings us to assessment of the meeting, future agenda items. Anything for the good of the order?
I think there was one more, a tenure.
Oh, we had a tenure
item on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just for Professor. Go ahead. I think Ms. Louders might have it. I'm not sure.
The agenda says Lisa Johnson.
Yes, Chair Hacker, this is Lisa Johnson. That's my agenda item.
Great.
If I could. Thank you, Chair Hacker, members of the board.
sorry.
Additional details regarding the award of tenure can be found on Board Policy 605.1, but as it relates to your agenda item today, there are occasions in which an institution hires a faculty member who has a tenure status that has been earned from another institution. And when this occurs, the institution must seek the board's approval to recognize the transfer of tenure status for the newly hired faculty member. The agenda item before you today is a request for just that, to formally recognize the tenure status of Dr. Joan Oss, originally earned at Valley City State University in 2016, to be recognized and transferred to Dickinson State University effective August 1st of 2020. Again, the request before the board is to recognize the transfer of tenure for Dr. Joan Oss from Valley City State University to Dickinson State University effective July 1st.
Chair Hacker, this is Casey. I would move approval of the recognition of transfer tenure status for Professor Joan Oss, effective August 1st, 2020.
Thank you, Casey. There's a motion.
Chair Hacker, this is Erica Solberg. I second that motion.
Great, thank you, Erica. Any discussion? Hearing none, Christy, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Ms. Louders, Ms. Nesset,
Yes.
Ms. Solberg,
Yes.
Ms. Bai,
Yes.
Ms. Louders, have you reconnected? Okay, Board Chair Hacker.
Yes, I'm sure that went ahead of her committee, so I'm sure she's supportive too. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll have an additional meeting on August 27th. We're going to hold that. We're going to keep that meeting to especially do an update on the last 3 goals of the strategic plan, but also to be additionally responsive to the COVID pandemic if we need to take additional action. Appreciate all of your work and time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hacker, and other presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hacker.
Special thank you to
Thanks,
Dean
guys.
Wynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks all.